Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs Programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you best-selling thriller novelist Brad Thor. Brad is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 20 thrillers, including books that have been called one of the top 100 killer thrillers of all time and one of the best political thrillers ever. The Reagan Foundation has been honored to have hosted Brad at the Reagan Library 3 times over the past handful of years for other book discussions. But Brad is more than just a writer of spy novels. He has served as a member of the Department of Homeland Security's Analytic Red Cell Unit and has lectured to law enforcement organizations on over-the-horizon and future threats. He speaks with us today about his brand new book, which just launched today, called Near Dark. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program, coming to you from our Air Force One Pavilion Leadership Academy Oval Office with Brad Thor and Reagan Foundation and Institute Executive Director John Hybush.
Brad, honored to have you on this program. Of course, we certainly wish that, as you have in the past, you would have visited us in person with your newest book, but we're just delighted and thank you for giving us the time today to talk to you about your newest book.
It's my honor, John, and I so love the talks that we have together. And what I'm hoping comes out of this is that while we have these huge audiences when you and I get together every year at the foundation, I'm hoping that we have an even bigger audience this year because people have the freedom to participate from home. So I'm hoping we have lots of eyeballs on us and that people have a great evening with us tonight.
Me too. And I know there's a lot of excitement, Brad, about this newest book. There always is when you're about to pop it out there. And so I bet we get a lot of interested people tuning in. I'm really looking forward to this talk. So great to be with you. Okay. The title of now your 20th book, Near Dark. First, how is Scot Harvath doing? I know you've said in the past that he's your alter ego. What a great alter ego to have. How's the alter ego doing in this day and age? Life going well for you? Are you happy and everything fine on your end?
Yeah, for Scot Harvath, my main character, things are not going well for him. They're going well. They're well enough for me as can be during the pandemic. I'm doing great. Harvath, not so much. Near Dark, the title of this, and I want to say for anyone that hasn't read one of my books, I tell people that, yes, this is my 20th novel, but my books are like James Bond movies. You don't need to have seen a previous James Bond movie to jump right in at the newest one. You're going to get caught up and figure out who Scot Harvath is and what he represents and what he's up to very quickly. Particularly with this one, he is at a very low point personally, professionally, doesn't even know if he wants to go on living, to be honest. Everything from his past is caught up to him. And when I give people the movie kind of log line, I tell them from a 30,000 foot view that a $100 million bounty has just been put on the head of America's top spy. And that's where we light the fuse for the rocket on Near Dark and it takes off.
Yeah, that's right. Brad, I was going to say, we now know what Scott's life is worth, not alive, but dead, this $100 million bounty. I thought it was a great way to start the book off. Talk to us about the book title itself. And I'm interested, you can talk about how the title relates to the plot if you'd like, but also tell me, are you writing the titles or is this a back and forth negotiation or a discussion with yourself, editors, publishers, as to what the best title for the story might be?
So that's a great question. We'll start with the last part first, which is I went back and forth. I had title, and my editor just kept saying no, 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 no. And I said, "You're driving me crazy here." And she said, "No, don't worry about it. We've got time. We're going to figure something out." And then she brought lots of plays on the word darkness. She was really into this dark thing. And so we did word associations and all this kind of stuff. And she ultimately recommended to me the title of Near Dark, particularly because of how well it fits the themes throughout the book, particularly the idea of personal darkness, of the flame of humanity, what makes us human, and how delicate that flickering flame can be, and how quickly it can be extinguished. Not necessarily by the end of with your life ending, obviously that extinguishes that flame, but how circumstances can extinguish that if you don't fight to keep your spark of humanity alive. So darkness works a lot in the book. And I even open with an epigraph from Plato that those whom love touches not walk in darkness. So the concept in this novel, and I got a great review the other day. The book's been very, very well reviewed. And I got a great review that said they loved kind of the counterpart of Scot Harvath in this book, who's a Norwegian intelligence operative. They think she's fantastic, this Norwegian spy. And they are both wrestling with demons in their own personal darkness. They are both on the edge of losing their humanity. And it's so there's a lot of inner turmoil that happens in the book, which is really engaging and draws you into the characters. But then there's all the stuff that I'm known for with the espionage and the action and the glamorous international locales. So this was really stepping outside my comfort zone, John. I really wondered, okay, am I spending too much time looking inside these characters? Is it too much? Are readers not going to like it? Is it not enough? I mean, you're a fellow author, so you know these things. There's no manual that tells you, do this on page 3. By the end of chapter 15, make sure you've accomplished this. So it really is tough. I've heard it said that being an author is pulling order out of chaos. And it's so true because yeah, should Harvath turn left when he walks out of the building or turn right? I don't know, and I don't know if it works until I write it down and other people read it. And by then, you put a lot of time and sweat and blood and tears into it. But I'm thrilled that the reviews have been so good because this is the second year in a row where I've really taken a leap and have really trusted my instincts. And the feedback is, gosh, his books just get better and better and better. So I don't know that I've got the confidence level yet to keep reaching like this, but after 2 books of really doing stuff that makes me uncomfortable, the feedback has been so excellent, I'd be foolish not to continue trusting my instincts and in reaching further.
Yeah, well, believe me, as a reader of your books, Brad, it's working. No concern about that. You talk about getting inside the characters' heads here, and this is the book begins with this a dark period in Scott's life. You've also said in the past, as you've moved from book to book, I think that you're careful to ensure that Scott evolves as well as a character. Maybe he gets a little older. Maybe, as in this book, you note that he's kind of lost half a step, right? And tell me, is that important in your mind to show the reader the character evolving over time like this?
I think it is because I think it makes him human. And I think, obviously, you never want to be accused of creating 2-dimensional cardboard cutouts. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's it especially matters if it's your protagonist, but you don't even want to do that with your antagonist. You want to be, everybody's the hero in their own story. Even the bad guys feel they've got reasons to do what they're doing. So one of the neat things about being an author is that I believe you can always get better. And I spend a tremendous amount of my time between books reading books on writing. This is my 20th novel. It doesn't get any easier. You would think it's easier to write these books. It's not. It's actually harder because I tell people I don't work for my lovely publisher. I work for the readers. Those people are my bosses. Those are the people I need to make happy. When they go and leave their 5 stars on Goodreads or Amazon, that's my annual performance review. And so I want them to be happy. you can go out, you could spend an extra hour or two at work, whatever, make back the money you paid for a hardcover book, make your 25 bucks, right? But the one thing you cannot make any more of is your time. So you are trusting me with a finite commodity, one of the most precious things you own, and that's your time. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you just as much value back, if not more. And that's just, my dad's a Marine, my mom is an entrepreneur. It's just the way I was raised. Don't ever rest on your laurels. Don't take your customers for granted. And in my case, my bosses, my readers, I want them to be happy. So it is tricky, though, to write a series character and to reveal a little bit more every single book. It's hard to do that. But when you show a character that's going through some angst and some turmoil, something difficult, we all have, into every life rain falls. We all have issues, things that we deal with. And whether or not your particular challenge in life is similar to Harvath's, we can all feel for when someone, even a fictional character, if it's done correctly, is hurting and is in a difficult place. We're empathetic by nature, and we want people to achieve and get beyond what is hurting them and slowing them down. So, there's probably people have wondered if I'm a little bit perverse running them through the meat grinder the way I've done. But I think that adversity reveals character. I think that's something that President Reagan would probably say, that adversity reveals character. And it's true. So it's tempting to make all of the adversity in a thriller novel external. Car chases, gunfights, going after this person, trying to track down the hostage, all that kind of stuff. But if you can show the inner turmoil of not just your main character, but other characters as well, I think that makes for an even more engaging read.
How do you keep track, Brad, of how Scot has evolved over 20 books? I imagine maybe it's just all up in your head and you've got an incredible memory for the disposition of his character from book 1 all the way to book 20, or no, do you actually keep a lot of notes and you've got in one particular place how you have advanced the character and his personality through the years?
Well, thank you for suggesting that I've got the kind of mind that can keep track of all of those details. No, it's my lovely wife has got recipe boxes with 3x5 cards. And when she reads the manuscript every year, she adds to it. And one of the things that I have been dealing with, and you brought it up in your last question, and I apologize, I didn't answer it. You talked about Harvath losing a step. I've got this great network of contacts in the special operations community, in law enforcement, in the intelligence world. And they've been around with me for 20 books. I watch some of these people. One of the biggest issues Harvath has is that he still wants to go on assignments. He still wants to go into the field. And it actually is very selfish. The fact that he cannot give up the rush he gets from going into the field, the fact he's so valuable, he has so much experience, he knows so many things, that it actually is foolish to keep putting him back in the field, but he demands to go back. He refuses to sit behind a desk. It's an interesting turmoil in the book, but for him to perform at the top of his game in the field, he has to cheat. And I know men and women who are out there cheating. They are taking performance-enhancing drugs. They're doing things. There's no rule book that says you can't take steroids if you're an operator or anything like that. What do we care? If it gives us the edge on the bad guys and you've got somebody who's willing to do it, they can go do it. So that's what Harvath is doing too, is like a Tom, somebody said it's kind of like he's in the Tom Brady stage of his career where, it's like, okay, how do I stay healthy? I'm still performing at the top of my game. I gotta, okay, if I can do this or do that, not to suggest that Tom Brady is taking any banned substances at all. I'm not making that thing, but in Harvath's world, he can. And so that's one of the things I do too, which I think shows his ego, shows a certain amount of frailty to him. The fact that he is losing a little bit of a step and he has to cheat to keep going. He's got younger members coming on the team that needle him a little bit about his age. But I always love that old quote that, and I'm going to butcher it here, of course, that youth and inexperience are no substitute for age and treachery, kind of a thing. So, if he can cheat, if he can bump you with his car and knock you down instead of running down the street to get you, this is what he's going to do. It's all about successful completion of the mission.
Right. And you, let me ask, I don't know that I should mention one of the key countries that you have chosen to place some action in. It's kind of near Sweden and Great Britain. But I wonder, have you been there before, Scott? Did you dive into that country and get to know it, or have you just had to do a phenomenal amount of research? Because it seems like you must have lived there.
Yeah, thank you. So I do a lot of research, and if I can't go someplace, so I've got friends at the State Department that have given me an informal, just as friends, not as employees of the State Department, that have given me an informal list of places I should not go. Just because I've been on TV and I've been very outspoken about certain terrorist organizations, certain foreign governments I've been very rough on. I certainly am brutally honest about certain foreign regimes in the books. And there are places where they are not countries that are not directly under the control of some of these other nations, but they have a lot of influence. They have intelligence operatives there. Not that I'm any big target, but if they could publicly embarrass me, in fact, it's interesting. I was thinking about taking a train from last summer from Berlin to Paris. And I needed to do it overnight. I was going to be visiting the U.S. ambassador to Germany, and then we were going to go on with my family to Paris. And I talked to a friend at the State Department. I said, listen, the only overnight train now, the Germans don't run overnight trains into Paris anymore. And the only one was a Russian train. And this one particular friend of mine, it's owned by the Russians, and it comes from, I don't know if it's St. Petersburg and works its way all the way to Paris. But this friend said, don't take it. I'm like, why? It's a train. And this friend said, listen, you're going to get on that train. That train's going to stop in the middle of some place in France. The French police are going to get on. They're going to go right for your compartment, and drugs are going to be found there. And it's no big deal. But that's the kind of thing. It would be a big deal for you, Brad. But it's not a big deal for them to try something like that, just like they would have loved to embarrass Clancy or something like that. I'm not saying me and Clancy are the same in that respect, but this is the kind of stuff that happens. And they said they would love to embarrass me publicly so I could not go on TV anymore. They'd be like, oh, that's the guy that got caught with the drugs on the train, a little Midnight Express sort of a thing. So I thought that was very interesting. So back to your question, there are some countries in there in the book where I have done a ton of research, and places that I did not go. But what I do in that case, if I can't go, I want to talk to somebody who is quote unquote operated there. I want to talk to an intelligence officer or somebody in the special operations arena, because they're going to notice little things that you and I probably, as just going in as tourists, are not going to notice. Because their lives depend on it. They need to know what's going on. So if something suddenly changes, they can sense, they can perceive that shift, that something, wait a second, what's going on here? So that's my goal. I always want to go if I can. And if for whatever reason I can't, then I want to talk to somebody whose life potentially depended on them noticing everything.
Well, you did a great job of that in a scene that takes place relatively early in the books, Brad, where I don't know if you wrote so well about it that I thought to myself, Brad had to have slept there. It's a site where presidents often go, and you did a marvelous job of pinning that down perfectly.
You're very kind. You're the second person now who has said this to me. The national security advisor is a friend of mine. The current national security advisor is a friend of mine going back to college. He got an early copy of the book. He called me and asked me the same question. I now know what you're talking about, and readers will get this very quickly, and they'll understand why John's calling it out. But the national security advisor said, when did you get invited to this particular spot? And I'm like, I was never there. And he said, okay, well, it sure seems like you were there. So it's kind of neat. So now I've got two of you saying that to me. So yay for good research and knowing the right people to talk to.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
I know in some of your books, Brad, you have, in such a charitable fashion, you've agreed to name a character after someone that essentially bids to make this charitable contribution. I wonder, are any of the characters in Near Dark one of those named characters?
Absolutely. So there is a lovely woman that made a contribution. Her name is Holiday Hayes. Holiday, and her middle initial is H. So she's HHH, Holiday H. Hayes. She's a DC resident that made a contribution to a military charity that I auction off a character naming right every year. And she plays the station chief for the CIA in Oslo, Norway.
Okay. Okay, that's neat. I've never heard of any other thriller writer do that. I just, it's a great technique and a really generous act of yours, Brad. So, yeah, well done. Talk to us about a term of art I think you coined that's representative of how you write your thrillers, and you gave it the word faction. Tell me what faction is all about.
So I cannot take credit for that. Glenn Beck actually said that's the kind of books I write, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. He's a big reader. I call him my Oprah because I think he's turned more people onto my books. He's definitely turned more on than Oprah Winfrey has, who's never talked about a Brad Thor book. I think my body counts are too high to ever make it into Oprah's book club, but she recommends some fabulous books. So faction. I love hearing from people who tell me I had to read your novel with my laptop open because I come across these things and I can't believe they're real. And then I look them up and oh my gosh, they are real. So my number one job is to entertain you. And I feel that responsibility now more than ever. I think a lot of us can use a great escape. It would be great to get away from pandemic and lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. So my goal is to keep you flipping those pages. I want this to be a book you take to the beach, you take to the lake. This is supposed to be fun. It's a thriller. But I believe that the bedrock of a good thriller are the details, and you have to get the details right. So I really sweat those details. I do a tremendous amount of research. I am constantly texting, emailing, calling people to say, does it work this way? Does it not work that way? And luckily, I've assembled, as I talked before, about this network of people. They're very, very kind, and they put up with a lot of questions that I think are stupid, but nothing is too small for me to ask. I try to lump it together so I don't call them 20 times a day and kind of, try to get a bunch of questions at once. So my goal is for you to have a great white knuckle thrill ride, and I want you to close the book. I want it to resonate with you. I want you to carry it around just kind of inside you for a while after you finish. But if you not only have that experience, but you walk away with a couple questions or you've learned a couple things in a thriller, that to me is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, well said. Let me ask you this. As you know, I try my hand at writing occasionally, and I almost, on my first book, made it into the New York Times bestseller list, almost. You've made it, it seems like countless times. I want to know, tell me what the feeling was like when the first book that you wrote that made the New York Times list. How did you feel? And I also want to know how you felt when your book made it to the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list.
It's so both are wonderful, wonderful feelings, as you can imagine, as a fellow author. It was great. I was in Wichita, Kansas, I believe. I think I was in Wichita when my editor called to tell me I was on tour, and she called to tell me that my hardcover, the current hardcover, I think it was my fourth book, and I made the extended list. So not the top 10, but further down, I'd made the extended list, and I was thrilled because, okay, then you're a New York Times best-selling author. And I was, great, I got to call my wife and tell her and all this kind of stuff. And I hung up, and I went to call my wife, and my editor called back, and I'm like, uh-oh, she's calling to take it back. There's something wrong. She said, your paperback for last year's book also made it onto the list. I didn't read far enough. And so I hit with like kind of a double, my brand new hardcover and the paperback from the year before. And it feels wonderful. That's great. And that's something they can never take away from you, is that you're a New York Times bestselling author. And then with my novel, The Last Patriot, which had a lot of, not a lot, but it had some controversy around it, because I was saying that there was kind of a almost national treasure, Indiana Jones-esque hunt for a missing chapter of the Quran, because there's some very interesting information around the time of the Caliph Umar, who was assembling the Quran, where he basically laid down a deadline and told all of Muhammad's compatriots, all right, 5 o'clock on Friday, we're shutting it. No more, hey, I forgot I had this palm frond with this one note written on it. He's like, we got to get this thing to press. So no more. And what's interesting about the Muslim faith is that there is a concept that Muhammad introduced called abrogation, where if I told you something last year and I have a new revelation and it contradicts last year's revelation, the latest revelation takes precedent. That's the more important one. So if there was, and there was some suggestion that not everything went into the Quran, there was an archaeological dig, or actually they opened a mosque, the roof of a mosque in Sana'a in Yemen, and they had found all of these old parchments and things, all these old early versions of the Quran, and a German team was brought in to do dating on them and everything, and they could read Arabic, and they're like, oh my gosh, wait a second, we think there may be some stuff missing from the Quran. And the Yemeni government was like, nope, shut it down. No, thank you, Germans. Bye-bye, get out. And so I thought this would be fascinating, because if the Prophet Muhammad had a final vision or final revelation and it didn't make it in the Quran, but it was powerful enough to change the faith, wouldn't it be interesting to find that book? Well, guess what? It was not well received in certain corners, particularly the more extremist corners, even though my thing was fiction. I wasn't saying there's definitely a chapter out there. I thought it was a fun premise for a novel. And there were some folks that didn't like it. So there was some controversy behind it, including an old Nixon staffer who had converted to Islam, staffer for President Nixon. And I want to say Bob Conrad was his name. I can't remember, but yeah, he didn't like it. And so, you can do Da Vinci Code, and suggest that Christ was married and had kids and everything. But God forbid Thor does a book suggesting maybe a chapter is still out there from the Quran. So that was my first number one. There was a certain amount of controversy swirling around it, which brought more attention to the book, which obviously helps with sales. You don't want to have to get death threats every time you come out with a new novel. That's not exactly a great marketing plan. So, but that was, I was at the International Thriller Writers Conference when I heard that it went to number one. So I was with several peers. So it was like being at the Oscars. And being a New York Times bestselling author is like being an Academy Award nominee. And then you hit number one, and it's like being an Academy Award winner. And it's a great, great feeling.
A wonderful story. Just great to hear, Brad. You talked about how your wife helps you with you've got these boxes of index cards and research laid out that way. Is there one of those boxes that has in it your next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plot ideas that you think of in advance, and then you choose which one will become the next book? Or no, forget it, that doesn't exist. You're not able really to think about the plot for now, let's say your 21st book, until you've got the 20th behind you. How's that work for you?
That's a good question. My buddy and fellow novelist James Rollins, he jokes when folks ask him, where do your ideas come from? Throughout the year, he clips articles and he puts them in a box, and he says when it's time to write the new novel, he shakes the box and says, oh, magic box, give me my next big idea. And he pulls out a clipping. He's got a great sense of humor. My ideas just come to me organically. Normally after I've finished a book and gotten it through the editing process, then I switch to, okay, what's next year's book going to be? And people say, where do you get your ideas? And I tell them, in the shower or after the second glass of wine, because it tends to be when I'm most relaxed that the creativity is able to flow. So I'm a voracious consumer of news. I read a ton of books, fiction and nonfiction, and I read news, like 3 newspapers. It's all digital, the newspapers that I do read. But I'm constantly bringing in, bombarding myself with issues and things that are happening on the world stage and so on and so forth, stuff that's happening at home and in DC. And it's just kind of like walking through the forest in the pitch black, and you trip on a tree root, and that's your thing. It just kind of happens, and I'll say, okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to do.
And that's neat. Now, you and I have talked about this briefly before. The smartest thing for you to do as a successful writer is to write book 21, 22, all the next ones, right in line with the Scot Harvath series, for lots of reasons. And, one of which is it's a smart business move. People look for the next in a series. Have you ever thought, okay, that's great, it has served me well, but I want to move on to a different new series with a different new character and kind of start it all anew? Again, I know that's a bad business decision, but I don't know, maybe the artist in you said has a yearning to bring something else out.
I think so. So as I've said, the readers are my bosses. And those reviews are my performance reviews every year. And when I hear from them on Facebook, that's the suggestion box at the front of the office. And they love Harvath. I love Harvath. Harvath is my alter ego. I love writing him. Do I want to do something non-Harvath? Absolutely, I do. So one of the goals I've set myself is with the pandemic, and my wife is a doctor, a scientist, and we're being careful here, and there's a lot of stuff we used to do that took up a lot of our time, enjoyably so, that we're not doing. So I have the gift of time, and I'm trying to use that gift of time in a couple of different ways. I have two teenagers at home, one who's going to be a senior in high school this year, another one who's going to be a sophomore. But in a blink of an eye, both of those children are going to be gone. So I am embracing, the kids run away from me now. I'm like Leo Biscaglia. I run through the house trying to hug them. And they're like, here he comes again, run. I am looking for Talib, who did, and I don't know if it's pronounced Talib or Taleb, who did Black Swan, that great book, had a book in 2011, 2012 that a friend suggested that I'm reading called Anti-Fragile. And it's about looking for opportunities at times of great disruption. So my great opportunity here is time. Is nobody saying, well, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you coming over to our house for the barbecue? I've got extra time. So I have had a thriller burning in me that I've wanted to write for years. And so part of my goal now is dividing my day so I get the Scot Harvath writing done early. And then my treat to myself is writing a little bit in the afternoon, early evening on the book that's kind of burning for me. And it's going to be an interesting experiment because I'm not under deadline with it. And when I get it done, it'll be interesting to put it into the marketplace and see how the marketplace responds to it. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if I sold twice as many of this standalone thing than I ever did with the Harvath thing? What if all my Harvath readers say, oh my gosh, that's fantastic, and we want one of those each a year? I mean, so we'll see, but it's a great question to ask an artist, because yes, if you're painting watercolors all the time, do you want to work in, I don't know, charcoal? Do you want to do something different? And I think every artist who's honest will say, you know what, yes, this is my bread and butter, and it's been very good to me, and I love doing it, but it would be fun to kind of stretch your wings a little bit. And I'm using the term, I hate to butcher them. It would be great to stretch my wings and try doing something a little bit different. So that's what I'm trying to do with this gift of time. And that's how I look at it, the gift of time I've been given.
Yeah, neat. Oh, I can't wait to see what other alter ego or what other character you've chosen and to watch that catch on with the public. That it'll be a lot of fun to watch that, Brad. Generally speaking, on writing, as you've said, you read a lot of books, and it sounds like you've read a lot of books on writing. So is there a formula, as it were? It's like, yep, you want to write a spy novel, you want to write a thriller, here's how it works. One from column A, two from column B. This is what has to happen in the middle. Or is that garbage in your mind? It's not formulaic.
I don't think so. For me, it's definitely not. I'm very organic. I don't outline. The only thing I do while I'm writing is, and it's not even an Excel spreadsheet, I'll create a table in Microsoft Word with about 5 columns. So I've got chapter number, and I can do a short description of what happens in the chapter. I can do date, and I bounce around with different time zones. So this started as a way to help me keep track of, wait a second, it was just nighttime in Paris. Now you're bouncing back to DC. Brad, do the math so that you've got the right time. And what I ended up seeing what I found was very helpful for me was I would color code different characters. So I could see, oh, wow, it's been 5 chapters since we last saw the protagonist. Maybe I want to get back to the protagonist now for this next chapter. So Stephen King had a great piece of writing advice, which is write what you love to read because that's where your passion is. So I don't think there's a formula for thrillers, but I think that if you write in a genre that you love, you've read so many books, you know why certain ones worked. You probably know why certain ones didn't work, why you love that particular kind of book. You actually amass some really good, really helpful knowledge. And not necessarily are there any rules per se, but you do get a feeling for the rhythm of at least the books you like. And that's the kind of stuff you should be writing. You should be writing the kinds of books you would want to read.
Yeah. Okay, so you already somewhat answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyways because I'm sure this has to be the number one question you're asked on the web, in person, when you go to events, the whole thing. Brad, how do I break into the thriller writing business? What do I do? What's your best pithy advice?
Well, the key to getting into the writing business is to find a good agent. And it's not about you don't sell to the publisher, your agent will sell to the publisher. And the reason your agent can sell is the editors at the publishing house know your agent and trust your agent. So essentially your agent is kind of a screen for the publishing house. If the agent's read your manuscript and likes it, then it must be good. And then the editor's willing to sit down and talk, or the editor says, okay, send me a copy of the manuscript. I'll read it. If I like it, I'll call you back, to the agent. So there is it's almost like an old phone book kind of a layout. It's called the Writer's Digest Guide to Literary Agents. And in it, they list all lit agents who have said, yeah, you can put my name and phone number and address in here because I'm looking for these kinds of writers in these genres. So you already know that these agents are up to receiving what are called queries. Now, the query sometimes is just a letter. It may be the agent wants a letter in a first chapter. The one thing agents say, and I tell aspiring writers to ignore it, is agents will say, only query one agent at a time. Don't query multiple agents. And they're totally narrowing it down so it's good for them. Well, guess what? If it takes an agent 3 months to get back to you to say no, and you have to go through 12 agents before you finally find one, that's 3 years of your life that are gone like that. I tell people you should shotgun it. Pick 5, 10, 15 agents that you think would be perfect for your material and shoot it out to all of them at once. And the smart agent who realizes you have something good and jumps on it quickly gets you. So that's why agents hate when I say that, by the way. They hate that. I don't care. So that's my piece of advice.
That's excellent. Okay, I'm going to knock on wood as I ask you this last writing question so that it never curses you. But I wonder, do you ever hit a writer's block moment, Brad? I mean, you've written so much. The answer is probably no, you don't. But are you susceptible like any other writer to that?
Oh, my gosh. Yes. And I remember the first time it hit me hard. We had a 2-year-old, 2.5, a 6-month-old, and we had moved from Park City, Utah back to Chicago. The house was not complete yet. So there were contractors in the house and I had to get a book finished. And I had writer's block so bad. And I wanted to blame it on little kids, contractors. No, I was just all caught up and worried because I'm such a perfectionist and wanting to top myself every time. I was making it difficult on myself. So I searched, John, for good advice on how to break through writer's block, and I found it. In those people watching tonight, there may be 1 or 2 that have read this piece of advice, and I feel so bad. I should tape it to my screen. The author, this lovely woman who said this, best piece of advice I ever heard was, give yourself permission to write a crummy first draft. Don't worry about it. Just get the draft out. You can't rewrite what you haven't written. Give yourself permission because the chances are pretty darn good that if you've got any talent whatsoever, it's not going to be a crummy first draft. But you need to get out of your own way. I often joke, and now I'm going to compare myself to Tiger Woods. And I don't mean to do that like from an ego standpoint, because I can't golf to save my life. But God doesn't reach down at points. He hasn't reached down at points in Tiger's career and taken his talent away. Tiger has gotten in his own way mentally. And I always try to remind myself of that. Tiger's always been a fabulous golfer. The only thing that's gotten in the way of his golf is Tiger Woods. So when I do have these moments, and I've had a lot of them, particularly as I progressed in my career, it's actually getting harder to write these novels because I am getting outside my comfort zone. I am stretching myself. I am worried. Are people going to just flame me on Facebook? It's the worst book I ever read. No, of course that's not going to happen. It's not. So it is such a psychological thing, and getting out of your own way, at least for me, that key phrase, it just clears me right out of my own way by saying, give yourself permission to write a crummy first draft. Great advice. And I apologize to the author who came up with it. She's brilliant. And I'm going to tattoo her name in, would it be in reverse? No, I'm not looking in a mirror when I see myself in the Zooms. I'm going to have her name tattooed across my forehead so I never forget it. I can just look at my own picture in the Zoom.
Neat. Okay, I would not normally ask thriller writers to talk about various current events, particularly ones involving diplomacy, foreign affairs, defense, that sort of thing. But that is your world, and so I bet you have an opinion on a lot of these things, Brad. These stories we've been reading for the last several weeks about the possibility, some would say the likelihood, some would say no, of the Russians paying a bounty, possibly to the Taliban in Afghanistan to assassinate, to knock off American military servicemen and women. Do you think that story is true? Does it hold water? And if so, how should the United States react?
So it's a great question. One thing we do know that is not being argued about is that the Russians have been equipping the Taliban with sophisticated weaponry. It's the whole, 1980s thing. And now the shoe's on the other foot. We were helping Afghans go after Soviets back, going into the early 90s, through the 80s and into the early 90s. And now the shoe's on the other foot, and the Russians are equipping. So that is not up for debate. They have been providing weapons to the Taliban. So it is not that big of a step to move forward and say they're trying to destabilize things there by encouraging Taliban to kill members of the United States military and the Brits, our allies, by providing cash bounties. And here's the other thing that we know. It was in the president's daily brief. To make it in there has to be such a high degree of certainty. And people who have never operated in the intelligence world or know people in that world, it is very rare that you get, hey, this is 100% certain. Most decisions are made in a percentage. What is the percentage certainty we have on this? So there's a lot of presidential decisions that get made at not the 100% certain level. That's a luxury a president rarely gets, particularly with hard decisions. So it was in the president's daily brief. That's been admitted to by the briefer and all that kind of stuff. So we know it's there. What should we be doing? We should be very aggressively pushing back against Russia and brand new stuff, not the stuff we've already done, but absolutely brand new stuff. Everything should be on the table as far as economic pushback, diplomatic pushback, and even military pushback on the Russians. This has been one of my biggest fears for a long time is the weaker Russia gets, the more they're going to lash out. And that's one of my big concerns. I actually think that Russia losing the Cold War created them eventually they morphed into an even worse adversary, an even deadlier, more dangerous adversary, because there's nothing like a former power who wants to revel in that glory, the lengths that Putin will go to prop himself up, whether it's crooked elections, to amend their constitution, all that kind of stuff. It's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. And so it's a tricky line for the administration to walk, but we can't let it go unanswered. And the fact that nothing has happened up to this point, and the American people we should hear from our president that we've done X, Y, and Z. We will not allow this to happen. It is the commander in chief. He owes it to our servicemen and women and to their families who stay home and worry about them when they go down range to risk everything for us. So, it's pretty serious. I believe it is legitimate, and I believe much more needs to be done than has been done so far.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a commander-in-chief related question in just a minute, but on that same subject, I know I've read, Brad, that you have said the time we're living through now in America, the divide that exists inside our nation has never been greater, and never, it's been a long time since it's been as concerning as this. And I wonder if isn't it likely that the Russians are playing a bad actor behind the scenes in terms of trying to drive this divisiveness? We know that started occurring in the most recent presidential election. I can't imagine they're not doing the same thing right now. Can you?
Oh, I agree with you 100%. There is no question that the Russians are involved. And in fact, they're pushing on every soft spot, every tender spot they can find. They ran a test, I believe it was in Washington State, where they tried to drum up a bunch of anti-vaccination sentiment, where they picked a particular area and they were pushing Facebook stuff just to people in that area. And you saw resistance by parents against vaccines climb there because of the Russian efforts. So absolutely, there's propaganda, disinformation, all of that kind of stuff, John, is absolutely going on right now. They are, this is, I think, one of the most interesting discussions we're having culturally as it pertains to free speech and these platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, so on and so forth, and what's the responsibility and what is the indemnity that these sites should enjoy when, I think it's crazy now. I think like 70%, and I'm going to totally quote a poll from like 6 months ago that I shouldn't even be bringing up because I don't remember exactly where it came from, but I was alarmed to find out the very high number of Americans who get their news on Facebook. This is where they get their news. It is not where you should be getting all of your news. In fact, you can be easily manipulated. And I'm looking particularly at some very wise people that I know, people from the generation of my parents' age and stuff like this, who are prone to fall for stuff that is just not true. In fact, a dear loved one we introduced to Snopes, the debunking site recently, to say, listen, before you believe this, that you got in an email or you saw on Facebook, go to Snopes.com, run this through. It's okay. We all, we all fall victim to kind of falling into echo chambers on social media, where what gets bombarded back to us are not things that challenge our assumptions, but that reinforce what we want to believe. And that's the danger of social media, is that you silo yourself in there. So I am concerned, particularly with some of our older Americans that aren't aware of all the tools that are out there to really get to the bottom of things, to get to the truth. So we love to be individuals. We love our freedom. We love our liberty. We don't want anybody curtailing free speech. I am the first guy to stand out there and champion for free speech for everybody, particularly as an author. But we need to figure out how we combat an evil foreign government trying to manipulate us and turn us against each other. We owe it to each other more than we owe it to Facebook to make sure we're getting the truth.
So speaking of these threats, I know you've, in interviews, you've identified the three truly obvious actors that are threats: Iran, Russia, China. Are they beyond threats now, Brad? Or would you say these three nations are our biggest enemies? I mean, they're more than threats now. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. They all benefit from, particularly Putin. The Russians really scare me because of Putin's two greatest enemies, in his opinion, are the United States and NATO. And so I worry so agreed on all three of those. What worries me in particular about the Russians is that we have a very war-weary country, and for good reason. We have been in Afghanistan, Iraq a long, long time. And my concern is with the revanchist Russia, with Putin wanting to claw back territory that used to belong to the Soviet Union. Well, if you've got Americans who don't want to send any more men and women to war, what happens if Putin grabs a small NATO member? Well, in our charter, the NATO charter, we have Article 5, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. And by the way, folks, for those of you listening, that has only been activated once. And it was activated by the United States after 9/11. We triggered Article 5 and asked our NATO allies to come to our defense and help us wage war against al-Qaeda. So I worry about if Russia moved against Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, there's a lot of Americans. You've got a really good educated group of folks who participate in things at the Reagan Library. These are good, worldly, smart, tuned in people. There are people out there in our country, though, who could not pick Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia off a map. They wouldn't know where it is, much less would they want to send their sons and daughters to bleed and die in a country they've never heard of or never could find on a map. And that worries me, what would happen in that case to NATO if we don't defend, if we don't go in, if it's politically unpopular. By the way, this has also provided fun fodder for my novels, because in the novels, I've got a president that says, let's not even test Article 5. Hey, Scot Harvath, the Brad Thor hero, go and do whatever it takes to make sure Russia is not successful in trying to drag us into something like that. So that's kind of become my new front in the novels, is what's bubbling under the surface that a lot of people aren't paying attention to, because that's how I beat the headlines with my books.
Yeah. So I take all your points about Russia. I wonder, Brad, talk about China right now as a threat, as an enemy, because I mean, in my mind, the one nice thing about the Russians is that, they're often inept, but China is a whole different scene, right?
Yeah, the Chinese are a big problem, and it functions on many different levels. So I've long believed that our national debt is a national security issue, because when you owe a lot of money to other countries, but it depends. There's that old line that if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. But if you owe the bank $10 million, you own the bank. That Chinese really can't afford for us to default on our debts. But there's other problems, particularly in the espionage realm, where China invests, millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in espionage. We're putting billions into research and development, and then they come steal our stuff. I mean, the Chinese are not creative. The Chinese are thieves. That's what the Chinese are good at, is stealing stuff. Because of the way the Chinese Communist Party runs that country, there is not a lot of individual liberty, let's say, which fosters creativity and sparks innovation. That was the line that I love so much from President Reagan's first inaugural address, is when he talks about the prosperity and success of America is because the creative genius of the individual was let loose like in no other history or no other nation in the history of the world. Think of the resources, John, the Romans had. Think of all the raw materials, all the manpower. They didn't create this incredible republic in Rome. They didn't have incredible, dramatic technological revolutions in Rome like we saw here within the space of 200 years from the revolution. Think of what we did in this country, and it specifically comes down to freeing the individual. So yes, the Chinese, huge threat and a big problem, and they are thieves, and it's really bad in the espionage realm, and it's also bad with what they're doing in the South China Sea, where they're trying to claim atolls and build them up. So this is going to be a problem for a long time, and it's also, we don't have to get too much in the foreign policy weeds, but it is why the United States Navy really does need a big infusion of cash. They're doing some great things with their weapons platforms, but we need to be building more ships. We just need more ships in the U.S. Navy, and that threat from China is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, it's, the need is to go back to the Reagan era approach and move to a 600 ship and more Navy. I think you're absolutely right, Brad. If you've been following the news in the last few weeks, and I know you have, there have been a whole series of explosions, whether in shipyards, in centrifuge areas, etc., in Iran. And I presume, as you might as well, here come the Israelis, or maybe even American intelligence is involved as well. Is that your view?
Yeah. So number one, when that stuff happens, I always think Israel. But we were involved with the Stuxnet virus as well with the Israelis. So I have no insider information on what's going on in Iran, but I agree with your assessment 100%. That would not shock me. I'll tell you this. I don't think it's the Dutch. Okay. I'll say that.
Yeah, okay. Just a handful of more questions, and I'll leave you alone, Brad. Navy SEALs. I remember growing up and occasionally reading about this secret, dark world of the Navy SEALs, and it was so extremely rare, though, that one would speak out and reveal, the weaponry and the tactics and things that the SEALs have to put in place to succeed. And now it seems like you can't leave the SEALs without a contract to write a book. And I wonder, is that a problem for our country, or it's not a grand problem, but I just find it amazing. I don't know if you do as well, that incredible institution is now pumping out authors one after the next.
Yeah. It's funny. An Army buddy of mine, I was chatting with a couple of Army guys, and and I have tons of friends in the SEAL community, and my main character is a SEAL. And I was listening to these guys, and they made a joke about, okay, such and such an operation, how many SEALs does it take? And they said 10 plus one to write the book. And that was kind of the punchline. And there are a lot of SEAL authors. I will say this: the SEALs are some of the most highly intelligent men I've ever met. And what's funny is a lot of the SEALs that I know have left the SEAL teams after very noble, distinguished careers and have gone on to finance. That shows you something. I don't know if it's getting dunked in all that cold water in San Diego that makes you really Coronado, that makes you really good with math and the markets. But there are some brilliant, brilliant people that come through that program. So yes, Delta Force people, the SEALs, there used to be a term called the quiet professional, and they didn't talk about what they did. They didn't write books. And it doesn't seem like that long ago that Mark Bowden did his book about the Bin Laden killing and everything. And so there was pushback from the Army. You see it less. That was a SEAL operation. Sorry. So there was pushback then in the SEAL community. You see the books written, not really as much, the kind of exposés and stuff on the Army side. You see leadership books and stuff like that, where on the SEAL side, there are things. So I don't know if it's Southern California being close to Hollywood, and that kind of culture is everywhere. Hollywood touches everything. But it is a difference. It is different than what it used to be. And listen, the founding member of SEAL Team 6, Richard Marcinko, did very, very well with his fiction, with his thrillers, the Rogue Warrior series. And now I'm going to get slammed because I can't even remember if Rogue Warrior was fiction or nonfiction, but I do know he did do some fiction. So anyway, it's part of the ethos on the SEAL teams still that, you know what, we do our work, we don't talk about it. So it does seem like it's out there a little bit more, but I would actually suggest that there's some great fiction SEALs that are out writing fiction, which is different than doing exposés. And maybe it feels a little bit bigger than it is. And it's SEALs writing fiction. It's not SEALs telling tales from ops and stuff like that. So SEALs may have a more prominent kind of position in the book world now. But I would say that that's being added to, not because there's a rush of SEALs to tell secrets, but there are a rush of great storytellers who are SEALs that are creating these great fictional thrillers. That's the way I see it. You get a couple of books here and there, but again, remember, these books have to be cleared too. There's a whole process. So if that book makes it out there, it's gone through the Department of Defense review and it's been allowed out. So at the end of the day, if the Navy doesn't want that out there, if the Defense Department doesn't want it out there, they could stop it, and they're not. So apparently something has changed, and it's okay to do those books. And I'm thankful for it because I gobble them up and I learn more from my thrillers by reading the nonfiction stuff. So, and even the fiction, there's great fiction out there too.
Yeah. Whether they write a book or not, boy, do we ever owe them a debt of gratitude, right? I mean, absolutely. What marvelous people. Yeah.
John, there is no American dream without those willing to protect it. So we owe them. I couldn't be an author if it wasn't for the SEALs. So, I've got so many friends in and retired from that community, and I could never thank all of them enough. I could never take one individual SEAL, even if I said thank you every single day for the rest of my life, it would still not be enough.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Last two questions. Brad, you, in the last year or two, have made some comments about our commander-in-chief. And talk to us about that for a minute, because I get a sense that you've been quite concerned about his leadership style. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things at play here. Number one, my dad is a Marine, and I grew up being taught about leadership, character, integrity, all of these things that are important for leading people, whether they're Marines, whether they're citizens. There are important things here. This presidency, has been different than any presidency we've seen in the past because we didn't elect a politician. We elected someone that had most recently come out of the reality TV world and the real estate world. So one of the things I've tried to do is it's like the old serenity prayer in all the 12-step programs. You're supposed to affect the things you can and kind of let the things you can't go. So I've realized that through a certain amount of stoicism, in stoicism, I mean like the Marcus Aurelius, and looking at things and what can you control and what can you not control. So we didn't hire President Trump for this job necessarily as a people because of the leadership skills. Temperament is a different issue, and temperament is something that even if you're hiring an outsider, a business person to run that office, temperament's important. And one of my concerns had been what happens, because every presidency gets tested. Something comes up during the presidency that is very difficult, and you're going to need to navigate those waters well. And I think we're seeing that with the COVID situation right now. It disappoints me. I'm a big believer in federalism, but still we have a federal government for a reason, because there are times when you can't just ad hoc it out to the states. We didn't say to every, and this is a Joe Scarborough line, by the way, I'm not going to take credit for this, but I thought it was good. I don't know if it was in Washington Post or where, but he said, when we had to hit the beaches in Normandy, the president didn't look at all 50 the governors and say, get your militias together. Good luck, boys. See you on the beach. Sometimes you need an organized response. And I think that by not getting ahead on testing and kind of having one federal standard, President Trump is now paying the price. As you and I record this, his polls for the handling of coronavirus are very low. And this is the kind of situation that I was worried about. American lives on the line, whether it was war, whether it was terrorism, or whether it was a pandemic. One of those three, where if the federal government didn't act well, but he's a populist. And this is the way populism works, which is everything, there's always got to be kind of like a wrestler, got to have the other wrestler that's the bad guy. And so even though he's the head of the federal government, the government is still bad. It's the deep state and all this kind of stuff. It's his deep state. It's his government. So I've been disappointed, particularly with COVID. I have family members who have very serious pre-existing conditions. Knock on wood, they're still doing okay. But look at where we are. We all locked down back in March, April, May, because we wanted to help. And now all of that was for naught. We've got the cases skyrocketing. It's going to be worse. And I want the economy reopened. I want people I love and care about to go back to work, to reopen their small businesses. I want people I don't even love and care about to go back to work and open their small businesses, people I don't even know. But because we've not had strong leadership at the top, we're floundering. And unfortunately, we're the world's joke right now. It's a shame that we're in this position. I wish we weren't. This is what I was worried about. And so, yeah, that's again, we didn't hire Trump to be a Reagan. He was never going to be a Ronald Reagan. That's just not how he's wired. And he also wasn't a professional politician. So, you got to take the good with the bad. But I'm just, to be honest, I'm stunned at the response. How many more Americans need to die before we as a nation demand a top-down solution, not just 50 different approaches? And Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, getting his wife to buy 500,000 COVID tests from South Korea. I mean, it's when the history is written of this time, future generations are not going to believe, that there were people that didn't want to wear masks, that, we rushed to reopen businesses, that kids gathered at spring break, and even no matter how righteous, that we had people in the streets not wearing masks and protesting, however righteous their cause may be. I just think history is going to look at us and just kind of say, what the heck were they thinking?
Yeah, well said, Brad. You mentioned Ronald Reagan, so let's close it out. My last question, I want to close it out on that. Let me read you a quote, Brad. Quote, I think a leader gets elected, and then the leader should say, we have our differences, but let's focus on what we have in common, because we actually have more in common than divides us. There's more that unites us than divides us, and I think that's where we all should be focused. When I read that, I thought, that's the kind of thing Ronald Reagan would say. And I came to find it's actually something that Brad Thor said. Well stated, Brad, really. I just wanted you to know, in summary, I think your outlook on the world and what this country needs is spot on. So, thanks not only for writing a great book, but just thanks for being a great American.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate Ronald Reagan was so much. I wish I had been old enough to vote for him. I didn't hit my 18th birthday in time to vote for him, but I've read so many books on President Reagan. I've got so many in my office and at home. Um, and I really think, again, I said this about 9/11, that it wasn't, they didn't hit the Twin Towers because it was full of Republicans or Democrats. It was full of Americans. And there really is more that unites us than divides us. And even if we want to disagree about certain politicians and have they done a good job or not done a good job, it's responsible of us to have these discussions because we're stewards of this republic and we have to hand down a freer, more successful, more prosperous nation than was given to us. So if we can put the tribalism aside and be fair and say, yes, the president has done good things here and here. Here's some place where the president really needs to dial it up a couple notches because we need better results coming out of the Oval Office and out of the federal government. That's a fair discussion to have because at the end of the day, they work for us. And if they're not doing a good job, then we're not doing a good job as stewards, and the next generation is not going to get the strong, healthy country they deserve. We got to hand them something better than was handed to us. America is an idea, but it's an idea that keeps getting better and better and better. But if we don't all work as citizens to make it better, then it's not going to happen. So,
yeah, darn right, darn right. Thanks, and well said, Brad. I can't thank you enough for an hour of your time, Brad, about your newest book, Near Dark, and all that you've said today. It's just been just a pleasure to be with you and hear from you again. I just, on behalf of everyone at the Reagan Foundation and Library, congratulations and best of luck, not only with this book on the stands, but your next one and your next one and your next one. So wonderful to see you, Brad.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me. It was great seeing you too, John.
Thank you for joining us for today's virtual programming event. We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.